My name is Bridget Chipai, and I welcome you to this episode of Enlightenment series, a program brought to you by Campus Life TV to enable us to have a broader understanding of issues related to our academic life. So today we're honored to be having Advocate Beatrice Mtetwa, a very well-known and well-published lawyer in Zimbabwe, a champion for human rights. Thank you so much.
I probably went to school when, your parents were still in high school, probably. I went to law school in 1976. I come from a very rural background where basically I did not know females were lawyers. So in terms of role modeling, I had no role models as to what law can do, what female lawyers in particular can do. And I didn't get into law because I knew what I was going to do with it. I got into it more by a process of elimination than choice. It was a question of, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. And out of the choices that I have and for which I qualify, what can I do? And law was top of the list because I didn't want to do the other things for which I qualified. So it wasn't like I thought, I'll be a great lawyer or I want to do this and that with the law, because I didn't know what you could do with the law with my kind of background. Interestingly, despite this being in the 70s, my class had more women than men. Which I look back, I never thought about it at the time. But out of a class of 14 students, there were actually 9 women. And of course, people drop as you go along. And when we graduated, 8 of us graduated, and there were 5 women and 3 men. And interestingly, out of that group, we've had quite a number of successful women. One of my classmates became Attorney General in Botswana after becoming a lecturer. She's now an ambassador, very bright woman. The other woman became, she heads one of the Commonwealth legal units. Generally, the women have done very, very well. The men have too. I mean, one of my male colleagues has just retired from being on the bench in Botswana. Another one was Attorney General in Swaziland. So it's a class that has distinguished itself. But interestingly, there were more women than men, even then, in my law school, which was unusual because the classes that followed us were not as diverse as ours was in terms of the gender, dynamics, right?
Oh, okay, that's amazing.
It was amazing for that time, yeah.
All right, so how did you handle societal expectations regarding to gender roles and responsibilities to focus on education?
My father was a huge polygamous man with God knows how many wives and how many children. But despite that, actually, he was very, very clear that everybody has to go to school. So he was very clear that he would pay fees for you if you were willing to go to school, and he pushed all of us to go to school. And interestingly, as we got older, his attitude was like, if you get married to a man like me, I want you to be able to look after yourself. I think having to look after all these women was becoming a bit of a problem for him. The expectations from society, I can't really say that I expected the society, to see me doing things out of the ordinary. I mean, during the time that I grew up, really, women's roles were very clearly defined. I don't think anyone expected me to be a successful lawyer for a start, because there were hardly any black successful lawyers where I was. So I don't think anyone had huge expectations. I don't know if I also had huge expectations myself, but I knew that I didn't want to live the life of those around me. I mean, being a wife to a polygamous man was definitely not for me. Going to sell in the market was definitely not for me. I knew that I wanted to look after myself, and I wanted to make sure that all my siblings, because I was the oldest in my family, I wanted to set a very, very good examples for my female siblings, so that nobody would say they took the wrong turn, because as the oldest, I had taken the wrong turn. I believe that I knew I didn't want to live the village life I had grown around, and that I would want to do something that my siblings in particular would emulate and follow. And I was largely successful in that. Virtually most of my sisters have college education.
Impressive.
Yeah.
So nowadays, do female lawyers fare well in practice, or they simply enroll in large numbers, but in the field of practice, it remains the male's territory?
I actually think that women do well given the conditions under which they operate. When women graduate, everybody really wants to be out there practicing law. But the practice of law is extremely patriarchal in a number of respects. If you want to be a litigator, for instance, it's not very easy being a litigator because the terrain can be extremely rough. You go to court, there are some judges who think that it is their job to humiliate lawyers, male and female, to basically show you that you know very little. One judge has been heard to say in the presence of a client that, oh, you just misrepresenting your client's case. And sadly, one of the judges who really is the worst in humiliating young female lawyers in particular is a female herself. And so there's nothing worse than being criticized in public. There's nothing worse than being humiliated, because when you say to a young lawyer that they are stealing money from their clients, that's not constructive in any way. There are ways where you can guide young lawyers nicely. So as a result, women are generally thin-skinned, and they take that personally, and it can crush young women who are not strong enough and who think that that is what will be happening to them every day. It's more an exception in that some of the judges who take their own inadequacies out of young lawyers are few. The majority of them will try to guide. So as a result, you find that women lawyers tend to then shun practice and go out and be in the corporate world or in the NGO sector. But when they do go out into the corporate world in the NGO sector, they still shine. The few who remain in active practice, you find that also they are limited in what they can do. You find that we get pushed into being divorce lawyers, because that's more like, oh, that's what women can do. You find that the corporate world, which is extremely male-dominated, will not give corporate work to females. And, I remember asking one CEO, why don't you guys give corporate work to female lawyers? I said, oh, but Beatrice, you don't know any corporate law. I mean, like, really? You've never tried me for a start. Oh, but you're a human rights lawyer. There's this perception that women are not cut out for corporate and company law. They don't know anything about the corporate world, which is absolute nonsense, if you ask me. So you find that if you do stay in practice, you get given literally crumbs. If you get given anything at all, you might get a bit of labor case law to do, but the real meat, where the real money is, almost always goes to the man. And of course, the old boys network is out there, big time. You find that, these guys meet at their clubs, they meet at the golf club, they play golf together, and so they don't even think of the females when they are, dishing out their work. One woman executive, I remember, and this I didn't hear from her, I heard from someone who was on the board of the company for which she works, was like insisting that there must be lawyers who are female in their chosen lawyers, and it was interesting because when she got promoted to head this company's regional operations, the work that was going to female lawyers immediately stopped. She's one of the very, very few women executives who were conscious of ensuring that the work is distributed evenly as between the sexes. I find also that women CEOs don't look out for other women, and in fact most of them use male lawyers. And when you ask them, the answer is that the board of directors decides which lawyers become the company's lawyers, and they have no say in it. I don't know whether that's true or not. But the bottom line is that I find as women we don't even support each other. And men think we don't know anything, frankly. It's only when you go to court against them that they come back and they're like, oh, okay, I think we should give you some work. That's the only way a lot of us have managed to get proper remunerative work. If you go to court and you perform well, and then they see you that you can deliver the goods, and that your gender really has very little to do with whether or not you deliver. Mm-hmm. But I also think women tend not to go out there to get the work. It's like, oh, because I'm a woman, somebody must just come to my office and say, here's the work. That's not going to happen. You've got to go out there and prove yourself for the work to come to you. Don't sit and then start screaming gender narratives that you are being discriminated against when you haven't actually tried. So try and try again, because there are many male lawyers who've tried but have not succeeded. So if you do not do too well, do not always ascribe it to your gender. Look at your performance, look at how hard you've tried, and consider the fact that actually there are as many men who fail as there are women, so it's not always a gender thing.
Wow, so it's really a fight.
Yeah.
It's really a fight. Okay, moving on. We're quite aware that you have emerged to be one of the best human rights champions in the country. Kindly enlighten us on the evolution of women's rights in Africa and Zimbabwe in particular over the past few years.
In Zimbabwe, certainly, I've always found that women have been in the forefront of fighting for rights. And that's understandable from the perspective that they've been the recipients of gender discrimination, of generally engendered behavior. So I found that women have been in the forefront of that, and I probably ascribe my being one of such women to the fact that I am a woman. I didn't particularly go out of my way to say, I'm going to be a human rights lawyer. I've always gravitated towards being on the side of the underdog. I've always tried to help those who need help, you know. And it was not a conscious decision. And as a result of doing that, I just found that more and more lawyers were being sent to me to more people were being sent to me to help them as and when they needed help, but they could not afford to hire a lawyer. You know, I get a lot of women, for instance, being sent to me by some of the judicial officers and judges to say, oh, Mrs. Mtetwa will assist you. Just go to her, she'll assist you because you don't have the means. I also get a lot of people just walking in from the street saying, you know, I need help, you know. My partner, Mr. Nyambirai, I met him because as a student he was walking to use it past 2nd Street where our offices were when I was working for a different firm. And he came in to ask if a lawyer could represent his brother who had been kicked out of an agricultural college unfairly. And he didn't have any money, and I took on the case for his brother, and you know, and a friendship started on that basis. I've just almost always been drawn to the underdog, and I suspect that's how other women have been. I've seen a very huge jump and an exciting jump in the number of women who will occupy any space that is there in the rights sector. Be it political, be it legal, be it anywhere, really. Women out there saying we are here, we will be heard. And I can see you being one of those because you are saying, I'm here and I will be heard through campus life. It's exciting. It's a pity that it has not become normal for women's rights to be just taken like any other right. I think we are at a stage where really women should not have to fight for space to be heard, because we're here, we're the majority, and we're the mothers of the nation. So really nobody should be taking us for granted. If we're able to bring these guys up, you know, and they're strong men, surely can only be because the women are strong. And I think we ought to be reaching a stage where really everybody understands that without the woman, the strength of the men is not there.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. So how effective is the legal framework for women policies in Africa and Zimbabwe?
Well, I'll speak more about Zimbabwe, although what happens in Zimbabwe really is the same in a whole lot of other African countries. Most of our legislative framework looks absolutely fantastic on paper, you know. You look at your constitution and the number of times that women are mentioned and the equality clauses there, etc. It all looks honky-dory. It all looks fantastic. It all looks like, wow, you know, Zimbabwean women are catered for. You know, we've got a gender commission, we've got equality clauses and the constitution. The constitution says there has to be gender parity in all appointments, all on paper. The reality on the ground is completely different. And sadly, a lot of us women are complicit in this because we are not insisting on enjoying those rights. When last did you hear female MPs and female senators talk about gender parity? Anyway, why do they agree to stand for elections when the gender quota is not met in the list? Why are they not saying, if this list does not have 50% women, we will not stand as women? Have you ever heard them say that? No. And the men have seen our weaknesses. Men will not go to strong women to say, stand because they don't want that competition. They know that strong women will give them a run for their money. So they'll choose all the weaklings to be in positions of power. This is why you hardly ever have these women contribute in debates in parliament, in Senate. You know, you hear Themba Mliswa more than you hear any female in parliament. And you ask yourself, why are they silent on all these gender-related issues? You've seen many abuses being meted out to women. Have you heard women complain about that? Have you seen them saying, we will march, women will not be treated like this? No. So, although in terms of legislative framework, we do have lots of, gender parity clauses in our legislation, in practice, we are not enjoying that. We also have a judiciary that is absolutely not gender friendly, which I'm always surprised by, because there are more female judges than men. We have done extremely well in terms of having females in positions of power in the judiciary, within the judiciary. You go to Anti-Corruption Commission, we have a woman. We go to head of ZEC, we have a woman. We go to Judge President, right now we have a woman. You look at the number of women in the High Court, in the Supreme Court, loads and loads of women. So why are our female judges not interpreting the law in order to enhance the rights and the lives of women? Why are they skirting around an interpretation that is very clear? Maybe there are two judges who are very clear in their interpretation of laws to favor women. Justice Tanga, each time you read her judgment, you can see that, oh, okay, you know, she really is trying hard to make sure that there's gender parity in the judgment, and that all these, legislative provisions are actually given life to, Justice Makarau, from time to time, also her judgments, you can see that, But generally, the interpretation of our laws is completely not alive to the need to make sure that there's gender parity. Zimbabwe has ratified a lot of international treaties and conventions dealing with equality as between the sexes. Our constitution makes international law in Zimbabwe now. But we're not seeing that. Again, you see Justice Sanga and perhaps to some extent Justice Makarau doing that. But generally, if you bring in all these international conventions, you would laugh if you look at some of the submissions that go into court, and when the judgment comes back, everything you would have said, particularly on rights-based issues, will simply just be ignored, completely ignored. So the interpretation of our laws by the judiciary is another big problem. We also have too many gaps in some of the legislation. I just pick, for instance, on marriage laws. I mean, for God's sake, why do we have so many different marriages in Zimbabwe that have different consequences for the women in particular? Why should a woman who's been married for 50 years because only Rora was paid, why is she regarded as being inferior to a woman who's been married for 3 years under the Marriage Act? I mean, that's just so absolutely unbelievable. Why don't we have one umbrella for marriages in Zimbabwe, so that the consequences of ending a marriage or the consequences when a spouse dies are the same right across the board. Why don't we have that? Why are the women who are in positions of power doing nothing about that? And why are the courts not saying, yeah, we can see that this is, the law on this particular type of marriage. We are giving the government, we are giving Parliament 6 months within which to bring this law into line with the Constitution, which requires equality. Why are the courts not doing that? So, there's a lot of gaps in the laws that need to be filled up. The judiciary could play a role in filling that up by being proactive and giving the legislative branch of government time frames within which to do certain things. You hear a lot about realignment of laws. Why has the Constitutional Court said you have 180 days within which to realign all these laws? Because we're tired of having to deal with issues that have not been realigned, So we're all to blame for not really pushing some of the benefits that should be coming out of, for instance, our 2013 Constitution.
Do you think political contestations are contributing more to human rights violations in Zimbabwe?
Oh, absolutely. There's no question about that. I mean, if you look at most of the human rights violations, there's a political aspect to it. Whichever way you look at it, there's almost always a political aspect to it. Firstly, the politicians have generally, used you young people to fight their battles through violence. When we talk of political violence is not caused by the Madaras out there. It is the foot soldiers, and those foot soldiers are you young people. And a lot of those violations occur because you allow us older people to use you. And because it is the political contestation, there's no question that that violence comes from there. There's very, very few instances of human rights violations that are not traced to the politics. Our politics has become so toxic. If you think differently from me, if you believe differently from me, you become the enemy. And if you are the enemy, instead of us, going into the ring to contest fairly, we want to contest physically through violence. So there can be no question that this is a part of the problem. If you listen to the language of the politicians, it is violent. It is extremely violent. How many times have you heard our politicians saying, "Pasina ningi"? What does that mean to their foot soldiers? When you say down with so and so, you're saying so and so must be harmed, correct? So they'll follow that. When you hear presidents saying what is he saying? He's saying, I'll whip you into action with that whip, with that sword. And when you get that kind of speech from the top, do you think anyone under him is going to be encouraged to not resort to violence? Because Shamine Monyuka is for beating you up. So everybody will take it from the perspective that that is okay. So the language used by our politicians encourages violence. The actions by our political leaders encourages violence. The messaging we send out to you young people is to say, beat up your opponent. I'll give you a t-shirt and a skirt, go and beat up your opponent. So politics is largely to blame for the violence that we see. Even in the farms, even in the mines, you find that the violence has political connotations to it, because some powerful political person wants this mining claim, then they'll use violence to get rid of who is there. Because I want to take over your farm and I have more power, I'll use political violence to try and dispossess you. So virtually every act of violence and violation is traced back to politics.
What do you find interesting in your life in terms of leisure and everything?
I enjoy just chilling with friends. I love being in the kitchen. When I'm stressed, I'll go and cook and cook and cook and cook. I find that a de-stressor. So, I absolutely and truly enjoy being a woman in the kitchen. I also love dancing. So, if you are partying and you say, "Go Mtetwa, come," you'll see me dancing there. So, I de-stress a lot with just chilling with friends and having a good time.
Oh, okay.